Hello and welcome to Game 12 of the 15th TCEC Superfinal, played between Leela Chess 0 and Stockfish. This one was quite a game with an insanely complicated ending that Leela blundered. But let's start with the beginning. Leela is white in this French defense, in her beloved French defense, in which few engines managed to survive with black against her. The game started with e4, e6, d4, d5, knight d2. This is the Tarrasch variation of the French, in which this knight goes to f3 and the other knight goes to e2. That way, white will have a very strong defense on the d4 pawn. Knight f6, e5, knight of d7, f4, c5, and now of course c3. If black takes on d4, white wants to recapture the c pawn and add support to e5. Stockfish now attacks the pawn again, Leela defends, and if allowed, then Leela would like to develop now the bishop to d3 and this other knight to e2 and the dog squared bishop to e3. But Stockfish messes with that plan and plays queen b6, preventing both bishop e3 because the b2 pawn is hanging, and also bishop d3. In some cases, in some variations of the French, bishop d3 is possible, but then this knight is not here on d7. For example, bishop d3, c takes, knight takes on d4, knight takes on d4, and now after queen takes on d4, white sometimes has this bishop b5 check and then wins the queen on d4. But since the knight is on d7, this variation doesn't work here. So after queen b6, instead of bishop d3, Leela continued with g3. Stockfish played bishop e7, king f2, and now a5. Stockfish is intending to expand on the queen side. The central pawns point toward the queen side, so this is the side of the board where black should attack. Leela immediately cools down the black pawns with a4. C takes on d4, c takes on d4, and now the b4 square is available for black, and since the d7 knight doesn't really do much right now there, he's the one that is sent into mission to b4 via a6. Leela would like to develop the bishop to d3, where it would be on a very nice diagonal, but right now it's not possible because it would drop d4. Both the knight and the queen attacks d4. But eventually it will be possible, so there's little point in first developing the bishop to, let's say, b5 and then dropping it back to d3 where it wants to be. So Leela just moves out the knight to e2 and is heading to c3 and maybe b5, and we'll handle the bishop a bit later. Stockfish continued with castles, king g2, knight a6, knight c3. And Stockfish kind of achieved what it wanted on the queen side. He holds back himself from playing knight b4 just yet in order to make it a bit harder for Leela to develop the bishop to e3 and the rook to c1. Stockfish needs to attack white's center before Leela manages to develop some kind of kingside attack. With the bishop on d3, Greek gift sacrifices are already in the menu, with bishop takes on h7, knight g5 and queen h5, so Stockfish needs to be careful. He now played f6. Leela continued with h4, f takes on e5, and now Leela doesn't really want this rook to be active on the f file, so she recaptured with the d pawn, h6, bishop d3, knight a b4, bishop back to b1, bishop d7, and now knight a2, challenging that strong knight on b4. Rook a c8, king h3, bishop e8, with the idea of maybe getting to h5 and pinning that knight. And if g4 happens, then f4 is weakened. Leela now continued with knight takes on b4, knight takes on b4, and now rook a3. Leela really likes these rook lifts, or rovers, as Grandmaster Yasser Seirawan likes to call them, rook ups and overs. And from a3, the rook is actually guarding e3, so bishop e3 attacking the queen is possible. So Stockfish ruled that out with bishop c5, bishop d2, queen a6 going for b5, rook c3, b5, and now queen c1, attacking the bishop on c5. Queen b6, and now knight d4, making use of the fact that the bishop is pinned. B takes on a4, bishop e3, bishop d7, and now Leela found a nice tactic in which she will win an exchange with knight f5. And now there are a couple of variations in which black loses an exchange, and with that also the game. For example, rook takes on f5, bishop takes on f5, e takes on f5, rook takes on c5, rook takes, queen takes. And now if the queen takes on c5, then after bishop takes and knight d3, white has bishop d4, defending everything. The black pawns are effectively stopped, and the rook will eventually get into black's position in one of these routes, either through c1 or h2, c2, c5, or even rook a1, rook a3, rook c3. Another option for black after knight f5 would be to take the knight with the pawn, but this also loses after bishop takes on c5, attacking both the queen and the rook. Rook takes, bishop e6, rook d1, rook d8, rook c7, d4, queen c5, queen takes, rook takes, and now bishop d3 could come, blocking the pawn, so d3. But after rook d2, bishop b3 and rook c3, the d3 pawn would be lost, king f8, bishop d3, and being up on exchange is enough for white to win the game. The black queenside pawns are stopped, and white also has a protected passed pawn on e5, so this is winning. So after knight f5, instead of taking the knight, Stockfish went for bishop e3, and now Leela played knight e7 check, which is the point of the whole tactic, winning the rook on c8. King f7, knight takes on c8, and now exchanging the queens doesn't work, because after bishop c1, knight b6 and bishop b2, white has rook c7, winning the bishop on d7. So instead of taking the queen, Stockfish took the knight on c8, queen takes e3, and now d4, attacking both queen and rook. Leela saved now the rook with queen f2, maintaining the spin on the queen, queen b7, attacking the rook on h1, rook c1, and now d3. Stockfish lost an exchange, but his d-pawn became quite dangerous. Leela now continued with h5, rook takes on c1, rook takes on c1, queen d5, king h4, d2 doesn't work here because after rook d1 this pawn is lost. So instead of d2, Stockfish played bishop c6, g4, king e8, rook f1, queen d8 check, king back to g3, queen d5, rook d1, queen b3, rook d2, and after some moves in which they try to trick each other, in this position at move 56, Leela played g5, king f8, g6, king e7, king h3, king e8, king h4, queen c4, king g3, and now after bishop f5, Leela went for a queen exchange with queen c3. Stockfish accepted, b takes on c3, and now knight c2. And this is an interesting position. White can't take the knight on c2 because after d takes on c2, black is winning. White can play rook a1, but now after a3, king f3, and a2, white has to be very careful. If he plays king e3, then black can promote, the rook has to take, and then bishop b1, and the pawn promotes. So after a2, here after a2, the rook has to go back to c1, and after king d7, king e3, king c6, king d2, and king d5, the rook can't take on c2 because the pawn promotes, so now the rook has to go back to a1, since now the king guards c1. But after c1 queen, king takes and bishop b1, the rook is arrested, and after rook takes, pawn takes, and king takes, black has king e4 and he's winning down all the pawns and he's ready to stop the pawn on c3. Having seen all this, after knight c2, instead of taking the knight, Leela went king f2, a3, bishop a2. The position is equal, but Leela has a hard time with the d-pawn. King d7, bishop b3, king c7, rook g1, and now, after king d7, having about 2 minutes on the clock, Leela blundered away the game with king f3. The position is extremely complicated. Stockfish continued with d2, king e2, and now knight e1. Taking the pawn on d2, of course, is not possible because of the fork on f3. And taking out the knight on e1 also doesn't work, because after d takes on e1, the king takes the queen, and now black has bishop b1, and the a-pawn goes forward. The light square bishop, white's light square bishop, will have to give himself up, and with that also the game. So after knight e1, Leela played instead king d1. Bishop b1 doesn't work now, because after rook f1, there's no fork anymore with knight f3, and if now a2, then white's light square bishop can give himself up, and then white can take on d2 and is winning. After king d1 though, Stockfish played knight f3, and the game continued with rook h1, bishop d3, bishop a4 check, king e7, bishop b3, bishop b1, trying a2, and now Leela went rook h3. If she would have played rook f1, then a4 is very strong, forcing the bishop to c4, after which black has bishop d3, decoying the bishop from the defense of a2 or taking the rook. But instead of rook f1, after bishop b1, Leela went rook h3, but now Stockfish has bishop e4, very strong move, heading to c6, a4, and promoting the d-pawn. For example, if Leela would have played now bishop a2, then after bishop c6, bishop b3, a2, decoying the bishop, bishop takes on a2, bishop a4 check, king e2, and black wins. After bishop e4, in this position, instead of bishop a2, Leela preferred to play rook h1, but now Stockfish wins the e5 pawn with a tempo on the rook. Rook f1, a4, forcing the bishop back to a2. Knight f3, taking now the knight doesn't work, because after rook takes, bishop takes, and king d2, Stockfish has bishop takes on h5, and he's also winning the g6 pawn because the bishop can't go to b1 and guard both the a2 and the g6 squares. Stockfish can just simply take on g6 and the h-pawn will win the game. So going back to the game, after knight f3, Leela preferred rook h1, and they continued with bishop d3, rook h3, and now bishop f5. Taking the knight, of course, loses immediately after bishop g4, and the king can guard both the rook on f3 and the queening square on d1. So after bishop f5, Leela played rook h1, king d6, bishop c4, bishop b1, rook h3, and the game was adjudicated here as a win for Stockfish, because after bishop e4 and rook h1, Stockfish has a very strong knight d4 with a double attack on the rook, and also threatening to go with the knight to b3, cutting away the bishop's view of a2 and promoting the a2 pawn. The game could have continued with rook h2, knight b3, bishop takes, pawn takes, rook takes on d2 check, king somewhere, and nothing can stop those pawns, so black wins. This was a very complicated tactical ending here that Leela blundered. It happens sometimes for her to blunder tactically, but she's getting better every day. Please subscribe, like, share my videos, and also binge watch all of them. Thanks for watching and see you soon. Take care.